Good evening and welcome to the Global Briefing Series, hosted by the School of Global Studies and Partnerships at Oklahoma State University and UPAEP, the Universidad Popular Autónoma del Estado de Puebla. My name is Randy Kluver, and it's my privilege to serve as the Associate Provost and Dean of the School of Global Studies and Partnerships at OSU. We sponsor these events several times a semester to bring to the OSU community incisive and expert understanding of critical global issues, and we're grateful to you for being with us this evening for our speaker. I'm grateful to all who help us to produce these events, including the staff of O-State TV, UPAEP, and the many staff at the School of Global Studies who work to make these events happen. Our topic today is truth, fiction, and lies in the new media environment, the existential struggle for global democracies. And the context is this. The rise of new media has presented distinct and unprecedented challenges to geopolitics. Far from being the peacemaker that earlier generations predicted it would be, the internet and associated technologies have become a tremendous challenge to policymakers, to citizens, and to states around the world. In fact, I would argue that finding ways to address the impact of new media is as serious a challenge as earlier generations faced in dealing with nuclear weapons. As these technologies develop even further, such as the rise of deepfake technologies, the challenge will be even greater. Yesterday, you might have read that the U.S. intelligence community stated in a report that the Russian government and the Iranian government meddled in the 2020 election with an influence campaign in order to influence the recent election, but also to undermine public confidence in the electoral process and exacerbate sociopolitical divisions in the U.S. The news yesterday just reminds us that there could not be a more important issue for us to address today, nor a better guest to help us understand these trends. I would like to introduce my friend, Jed Willard. He is Director of Global Engagement at the FDR, the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Center at Harvard University. The FDR Center honors the 32nd American president's legacy by pursuing solutions to current global challenges while keeping in mind their historical origins. Over the past decade, Jed has consulted with the U.S. government and a number of other governments and other international actors, helping them to understand prevalent and emerging narratives, the drivers of public opinion and sentiment, and creating strategies and structures to effectively engage citizens around the globe. Jed has also worked with the government of Mexico and their public diplomacy outreach efforts. Jed is also the founding director of the Public Diplomacy Collaborative at Harvard Kennedy School, applying social sciences to international communication challenges and bringing together public diplomacy scholars and practitioners across sectors, disciplines, and national boundaries. Jed is a great friend of mine. I've known him for several years, and it's just a delight to welcome him tonight. So please join me in welcoming Jed Willard.
Thank you very much, Randy. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here, and I'm just excited to do a little chatting and then hear some great questions.
Great. Well, get started.
All right, I will. So bear with me here as I use the technology. Okay, so today we've got a big topic, and it's got a really long title. Truth, Fiction, and Lies in the New Media Environment, Existential Struggle for Global Democracies. It's a very big title, and it's a challenging topic to unpack. So I'm going to leave out a bit of the psychology and focus more on the politics. If we want to get into some of the psychology in the Q&A, I'm happy to do that. So let me frame this. This is how I'm going to walk you through this large topic. First, we're going to talk about this notion of fake news. I am not a fan of the term fake news, and you'll find out why pretty soon. After we cover just some definitional stuff, we're going to talk about the Middle Ages. And I know that sounds kind of weird, since I'm supposed to be addressing new media and the internet age and modern diplomatic challenges, but we're going to talk about the Middle Ages. Hopefully you'll understand why. Following that, we're going to talk about active measures. Now, Randy mentioned some efforts that Moscow made around the 2020 elections, and they put in some efforts around 2016 as well. Active measures is an old term that basically means messing with someone else's country and messing with their politics, preferably in a way that they don't discover. So the notion that was pushed by Moscow during the Cold War that the American government had manufactured the AIDS virus, that was an active measure. It can mean a lot of different things, but in this particular context, because we're talking about misinformation, disinformation, let's think of it as the application of disinformation. So we're going to talk about what makes these things work. Then finally, because I promised I would get here, we're going to talk about how we fight back, the resistance that folks in democracies can bring here. It doesn't all have to be about offense. We can do some defense as well. Okay, so to get started, how complicated is this stuff? Shouldn't there be some simple solutions? What are some possible solutions to so-called fake news? Well, regulation. Why can't Congress pass a law to make it difficult for people to use manipulative language? And that leads us quickly into restrictions on speech. Should there be speech that's considered so harmful that it should be legally restricted? What about the social media platforms, these dangerous behemoths? Should they be responsible for fixing this challenge? What about media literacy training? Media literacy training is it's the classic low-hanging fruit. It's generally a go-to solution that people bring out whenever you want to talk about disinformation. Because, of course, if we simply trained people to be media literate, they would be hard to fool. Well, it turns out that even the most media literate people are easy to fool when they're not paying attention, which is most of the time. So to go into more detail here, I'm going to present you with an information chart. And the chart works like this. Over here on my y-axis, I'm measuring the accuracy of information. So towards the bottom of the screen, it's low accuracy information. It is probably just not true. High means it's as objectively true as we can get. And I'm going to be using the words of reporting for most of this chart, of journalism, but this goes for your brother-in-law on Facebook too. Okay, on the x-axis, we have intent. Now, intent matters because something can be true and benign, or it can be intended to cause damage, even if it is true. And we'll get into these a little further. Okay, here's my chart. Now, way up on the top left, good quality reporting. This is what we want in our newspapers and our TV stations and our brother-in-law on Facebook. We want accurate reporting that is there to inform us, as close to objectivity as we can get. Sometimes we don't get that. Sometimes reporting is just poor. Sometimes there's not good information out there. Sometimes we make a mistake and jump to conclusions, even if we're journalists. This would be medium accuracy, but not of ill intent. It's also possibly dangerous. And I want you to rethink back to those simple solutions. How do you regulate poor reporting? How do social media companies regulate poor reporting, even if a government doesn't? It's a very particular topic, very particular problem that is different from misinformation. Misinformation is it's a word usually used in concert with disinformation. Misinformation isn't intended to cause harm, but it is so false as to possibly cause harm anyway. So misinformation could be a very well-meaning friend of yours in California who is sending you lots of anti-vaccine literature. She doesn't know the information's false and possibly dangerous, probably dangerous. So it's benign in intent, but it's so low in accuracy as to be dangerous. How do you regulate that? How do the social media companies regulate that? Do we want them to? Do we want the government to regulate misinformation? Remember, your friend in California, she likes you. She's worried about your health. Okay, now we've moved over into the malevolent column. Malicious reporting. Now up here, we have malicious reporting that is both high in accuracy and malevolent in intent. That is, it is true, but it is there. It is being pushed to you to cause harm. It's being pushed to you to cause rifts in society. An example of malicious reporting could be a news outlet or a website that does very, very careful review of police blotters all over the United States. And they find crimes committed by immigrants, and they then report those. Very meticulous, very accurate. They're only reporting crimes committed by immigrants. Why would they do this? They're doing it because they are malicious and they have ill intent, and they're trying to cause rifts in society and cause distrust. Then we have manipulative reporting. Now, manipulative reporting is something that you'll see anywhere. Anytime you pick up a journal or you look at a website that has a strong political bent, you will often find that the language they use is intended to give you a certain reaction. There are websites that my mom just is constantly sending to me, where they pull content from quality news outlets and they just rewrite it to be manipulative and political. So they actually they use other people's reporting, which is good reporting usually, and then they change it to have language to create a certain emotional response. That's manipulative reporting. It is there to manipulate you. It is there to hurt you. What do you do about it, though? Those websites with a political bent, should they be shut down? Should there be warnings on Facebook? And I want you to notice, for all of these different problematic areas, they might have solutions, but the solutions are not the same. So we have to be very, very careful before we jump to simple solutions. And then finally, what everyone's been waiting for, fake news. Yes, there is fake news. You can just invent news that you are inventing to cause harm to your enemies or to someone else. Does it exist? Sure. Is it common? Not as much as we like to talk about. Now I'm making things more complicated because I'm throwing in here column number 3, which is political speech. Now, political speech is not necessarily malevolent. It's not, not all politicians are trying to hurt you. But it's not benign either, because politicians are trying to win. They are trying to win an argument so that you will vote for them or follow them in a non-democracy, and their opponent will lose. So it's somewhere in between in terms of intent. Now, you can have political speech that is very high in accuracy, well done, and it's giving you a story that you want to hear about the country you'd like to live in. I work at the FDR Foundation. FDR, he was very manipulative in his speech, but he strove for accuracy, and he obviously had good intentions, although sometimes didn't share his full plan. Okay. And let's face it, politics as usual does involve a lot of mudslinging. It involves a lot of dodging the question or begging the question. And that's politics. And it's hard to win elections. Politics is not easy. And so sometimes we end up right here muddling in the middle. And then finally, every now and then you'll run into a politician who does not tell the truth. Some of them lie a great deal. It happens. How do you regulate this? What do you want the social media technology companies to do about political speech? Anything? Would it be, in fact, dangerous if they did anything? What about the current government? I can tell you that the governments that I'm aware of who have passed very strong fake news laws have used them not exclusively, but primarily against their political opponents. What's the way out of this? I'm going to go into more detail about specifics of dealing with disinformation and misinformation at the end of this talk. But I want you to have some idea of the 3 main things that we need to think about when we are addressing this very, very complicated old and new media environment full of lots of different kinds of information with lots of different intents. The first thing we need is awareness. And when I say awareness, I'm thinking awareness among the broad population. And awareness means you should think twice when you get information about these topics, because some people are trying to manipulate you. Awareness doesn't mean that you have to be constantly fact checking. It doesn't mean that every person has to care deeply about politics, international relations, or vaccines. But it does mean that authorities, and by authorities I don't just mean government, trusted institutions, need to help regular people understand that sometimes there's manipulative or false information out there, and you should be aware and double check yourself. Double check. There was a paper, it actually just came out, which showed very clearly that fact checking, you have to be careful when you do fact checking, but that it works. It's effective, even if it just makes people pause for a moment. So even if it's just, hey, there's a warning on this particular piece of information, you might want to double check. Did you read that article before you forwarded it, or were you just being triggered by the headline? Those little reminders, whether they're full fact checks or just little nudges, they work. They work because people don't want to look like idiots. And so you can actually stop people from forwarding nonsense on social media, or you can start to stop them by giving them these little nudges. But they have to be aware. So a broad awareness that in certain areas you should double check yourself is good. Now, for folks who have a responsibility to deal with this problem or to defend our democracies, they need to pay attention. Attention is different from awareness. Attention means they do need to have robust fact checking. They do need to be very careful about how they report or how they document things that are especially new or dangerous or emergent. And I'm thinking here of trusted authority figures, people in government, including at the state and local level, in fact, often especially the state and local level, as well as the media. And the media, not including the platforms. The platforms also need to pay attention to this, but in a different way. You'd think that people would be paying attention to this, because I mentioned active measures earlier, that go back, well, thousands of years really, but in the context of the Cold War, many decades. People like Randy and myself were a little surprised back in 2016, in November of 2016, when all of a sudden we woke up to the fact that other governments might be trying to manipulate our elections. They weren't. People were surprised, and there was a lack of attention paid at the highest circles to these challenges, which are real and can be effective and have real-world consequences. You can check on the recent elections in South Korea if you want a rather dramatic example. Okay, the third one is alternative narrative. Probably the most important. You cannot correct a lie unless you provide an alternative story, preferably a true story. If you go in and you fact check by saying what you just read about this building being burned down, having been arson, that's not true. It was not arson. People will walk away, and thanks to something called the continued influence effect, among other things, and think in the back of their minds, oh yeah, there was arson. Arson's definitely a problem. You have to replace it with an alternative story. And this could be a small story. The fire was caused by rats chewing on an electrical wire. Or it can be a big story of this world, this country that we live in that has endemic corruption. There is another way that we can operate. We can see that by looking at other countries, and we can live differently. So the alternative narrative can be a large story for a large problem, or a small story for a smaller problem. So these are easy to remember. They're the 3 A's. And again, towards the end, I'll get into some gritty detail, but remember the 3 A's. Okay, the Middle Ages. I told you I was going to talk about the Middle Ages. Now I'm going to talk about the Middle Ages. If I'm not mistaken, this is a map of Tlaxcala. I was looking for one of ancient Puebla, or medieval Puebla, but I like this one of Tlaxcala. Also around the same time period, so around the 10th century AD, this is Oklahoma. This is a shot of, I think it's called the Spiro site. It's from the Caddoan Mississippian culture. Absolutely incredible what these people in Oklahoma were doing back 1,000, 1,200 years ago. Definitely check it out if you haven't had a chance. But As much as I am interested in the Caddoan culture, as well as the post-classic in Mexico, I'm actually going to talk about the Middle Ages in Europe. And here you can see a typical medieval scene, a late medieval scene, where you've got some very holy people who are praying, while a rather nefarious-looking gentleman who apparently does not want to pray the way that they pray is being burned. And he looks unhappy about that. And you can see there's a demon coming down to collect his wayward soul. Why are they burning this guy? He's a heretic. He thinks differently, and they're burning him. That seems excessive. Well, there was a lot of persecution in the Middle Ages, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. Here are some groups that were persecuted in the High Middle Ages. Jews, and persecution of the Jews really ramped up around 1000, 1100. Heretics went from being, heretics were something that were considered problematic in the Byzantine Empire, but in Western Europe, they weren't really considered problematic at all until around the year 1000. Landless migrants. This was a time when there was a baby boom. There was a tremendously improving economy, weather, and the efficiency of agriculture. And so there were people who were on the move, looking for better positions. It was also serfdom was going out of, well, at least it wasn't going out of business, but it was becoming less popular. Homosexuals were absolutely discriminated against horribly in the Middle Ages. Prostitutes, this actually they would say prostitutes, but they generally meant any woman who didn't want to do what men said. So prostitutes means independent woman. And then lepers, which again referred to basically anyone with a visible skin disease. Lepers were persecuted in the Middle Ages in a way that just seems a little strange to us today. At least I hope it does. And why? What were the Jews, the heretics, the landless migrants, the homosexuals, the ladies, and the lepers? What were they doing that got them persecuted? Well, nothing. This particular time period was a period of enormous social and economic change. Mostly, if you look at the economic space, very positive. As I mentioned, population's booming, agriculture's doing great. Communication within Europe is vastly improving. Europe has stopped being on Western Europe has stopped being on the receiving end of invasions and is actually turning around and starting to invade their neighbors for the first time in hundreds and hundreds of years. The food supplies are going up. You still have to this day giant tracts of land that were marginal, so swampy or rocky, but were farmed in the 1200s because all the land that could possibly be farmed was being farmed. And nowadays, we would never think of farming those. In fact, no one even knew that they were farms until we had airplanes that could fly over and spot them. So there's enormous social and economic change. And that's leading to some other factors. There's also a tendency for the nobility and the clergy to have tighter control over communities and of what people think and what people do. You had some historians would argue you even had the invention of objectivity, which was a way of telling communities that their subjective way of solving problems and dealing with crises was no longer acceptable. You had to be objective, which only the church was really good at doing, so they said. And this dramatic change led to a few things. One, it led to new societal divisions. As people moved and as their interests changed, they had to find new common ground with people they may not have known before, and they may also have lost, the few of them who did leave their villages, it was actually a small number, lost the older communal aspects that would help them to understand sort of in-group and out-group dynamics. So you have societal division, which is shifting, and that leads to uncertainty, and broad fear. Any time you have massive social and economic change, you are going to have people react with fear. Now, I realize here that I'm talking about the Middle Ages, but I hope that some of this is sounding a little bit familiar from our own lives today. So, what about those groups that are persecuted? Well, fear often leads to scapegoating. People in the High Middle Ages were afraid that society was changing. They didn't understand it. They felt like there were these large impersonal forces out there that were terrifying. And so who did they blame? Minorities and people with less power. They participated in scapegoating. So I mentioned to you that I was hoping that some of this would sound familiar from our own lives today. Nowadays, these are not specifically the groups that are persecuted in Europe and in North America. Instead, we have others that we attack. So instead of Jews, conspiracy theories featuring George Soros. Instead of heretics, we bully atheists. Instead of landless migrants, we worry about asylum seekers. Homosexuals, they still get plenty of abuse, especially in Eastern Europe. Prostitutes, yes, actually misogyny continues to be a massive, massive problem, especially on the internet, but as we've recently learned elsewhere as well. And lepers, actually don't really worry so much about lepers anymore. Instead, we go after vegetarians. And you may think that I am kidding about the vegetarians. I am not kidding about the vegetarians. Here's a wonderful quote from the former Polish foreign minister about his previous government and basically any other liberal government. He talks about the program of a new mixture of cultures and races, a world made up of cyclists and vegetarians who use only renewable energy and fight all forms of religion. Why is the Polish foreign minister going after cyclists and vegetarians? Is he really concerned about cyclists and vegetarians? Or is there something else going on in Poland and with the power structure in Poland where he is using this obviously inane fear of people who use renewable energy to respond to real change? And lest you think this is only in Europe, here's something from our own friend Matt Getz, talking about people who have a worldview different from his, apparently. It's a worldview where you eat nothing but kale and quinoa, where those of us who cling to our Bibles and our guns and our fried foods and real America are looked down upon. I would argue that Congressman Getz is manipulating his audience, but responding to real fears of real changes. Okay, what does any of this have to do with disinformation? For disinformation or active measures to work, they need to attack real issues. Now, this doesn't mean real issues that we really should be worried about, but they have to attack stuff that's natural, that's already existent in the environment. So they can exploit societal division. They can stoke fear. They can go after scapegoats. This is what makes disinformation and active measures work. If they go after something that no one cares about, then disinformation fails because people laugh at it because it sounds ridiculous. And this is something about conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories, for the most part, don't travel well. So if I were to tell you that when the river floods, it's because the CIA and the Mossad have set up a flood machine in the Hindu Kush, and that's what's flooding our land in Pakistan, you would think that's crazy. But that's a popular conspiracy theory over there. And then this is one of my favorites. Randy and I encountered this when we were working together in Helsinki. There was a conspiracy theory pushed by the Kremlin and by their allies in Finland and across Northern Europe that the democratic governments of these countries were stealing children, ethnically Russian children, from their families and then selling them to be raised by gay couples in America. That sounds stupid to me, but because it worked with that audience, because it tapped into their underlying fears and their scapegoats, because it worked with them, it worked. So disinformation active measures will work with this particular audience, but they don't travel well. That's another good thing to know, because you can recognize them more easily when you see them somewhere else. And then you can look for the same problems in your own society. So this is about it. This is about how disinformation functions. Keep calm and blame others. There are real challenges that society is facing. There are real changes. People are having natural, albeit negative, human reactions, and then the bad actors exploit those, whether with disinformation or active measures or simple politics. Okay, So what's the macro solution here? What do we need to do with these societal divisions and these fears? Because they are real, natural, unfortunate human reactions to real social and economic change or to real problems. There were tons of conspiracy theories about COVID. That doesn't mean COVID was fake. People are terrified about climate change, and that leads to all kinds of fear and even mental anguish. And it's a problem. These are things we have to solve. Oh, one thing about conspiracy theories not traveling. The big conspiracy theories that were being pushed by especially Beijing and Moscow at the beginning of the COVID crisis were that it was a bioweapon that had been manufactured, preferably by the Americans. And a couple of things happened with that particular conspiracy theory. One, the Japanese and the South Koreans and the Taiwanese picked up on this and said, oh my God, it's true, but it's not the Americans, it's the Chinese. And so that it took off there. And then it didn't work very well in the United States because we so quickly politicized the question of COVID that it became more efficient for our adversaries to manipulate our societal divisions that we were organically growing. We were growing our own conspiracy theories. So they didn't even bother pushing their bioweapon thing very hard after that. Okay, I mentioned alternative narratives. In the face of real problems or real changes, we need positive narratives to carry us through. We need visions of how we're going to get past this problem or this transition. And we need those to come from our leaders, our political leaders, and our other thought leaders, our leaders of institutions. Because it's those positive narratives that describe the future we want to live in. We are afraid right now, or we are concerned or confused. But if we have a vision of what we're going towards, what's going to be on the other side of that chasm, then it makes disinformation less effective, because that's our story. That's our alternative narrative. And that's the kind of language that we need from our leaders. Now, I don't consider myself a leader, because the future I want is this. This is utopia. Who could complain? How can you complain about this? I think this is a lovely future. But typically, we have political leaders who paint the picture of the future we want, if they're not exploiting the fears and societal divisions. And by painting that picture, it can create, in a perfect world, the will to defend that future. And if this sounds hard to you, keep in mind that this is what politics is. At its heart, politics is telling stories that win over people, that they want to believe in, so that they can work towards making that story true. That's how politicians, benevolent politicians, win elections, or even in non-democracies. They typically have to do that as well. All right, so what do we do in detail? The most important things, again, are the 3 A's. If you don't remember anything else, remember the 3 A's. Awareness, people should know that something's going on. Attention, those in positions of responsibility do need to take this stuff seriously. And alternative narrative, we need our leaders to paint us a better picture of the future we want. All right, now for a little bit of detail, and then I promise I'll stop and we'll get to questions. So if you are in a position where you are trying to counter disinformation, whether it's just in your daily life or whether it's your job, most important, have your own positive vision and stay on message. There's a reason why politicians answer the question that they wished you asked them instead of the question you actually asked them. It's because it works. You want to be consistent and get your message out over and over and over again. Fact checking is complicated, so do refute fabrications. Fact checking does work. There's been some research in the past that was problematic about fact checking. So do refute fabrications, but for every refutation, make sure you have multiple reassertions of your own positive narrative. Stay on it relentlessly. Because if you just correct that story about the arson, people are going to remember the arson. But if you give them an alternative story, it's going to work better. And you want them to remember your story and believe in your story. Always include your narrative in the refutation. Get in your points, even if it means not rebutting directly. Sometimes this stuff is silly and it doesn't really need to be answered, but you still need to be out there telling your story. Don't support oppositional narratives by responding within their frames. Framing is an interesting thing. You can win an argument at the outset by framing it. If someone comes to me and says, "Oh, hey, Jed, when did you stop beating your wife?" That's not a good frame for me or them. So I don't want that frame. Don't respond within their frames. Get outside of the little nasty story that they've set up for you, and just have the debate there. Again, be proactive, far more than reactive. You want to be making the truth louder. You want to be telling your story all the time. Understand the opposition's core messages and push back against those. That's the good one. That means that when they want to talk about scapegoats or vegetarians or quinoa, when they want to have that conversation, don't go after those. Recognize what they're doing and go around and talk about real needs, real problems, real changes that need to happen. Don't pick the unnecessary battles and don't let your adversaries pick them for you. Go for the basic principles. Critical thinking skills. So critical thinking skills, I mentioned this at the outset, they're incredibly important and they're great, especially for economic development. If you don't use your critical thinking skills, you're still going to be easily manipulated. And sometimes we find ourselves in situations where something that policymakers might consider extremely important is not considered important enough to pay attention to by regular voters. There's a big thing we're working on right now that a number of people are working on, which is Nord Stream 2. It's a pipeline, and it's extremely problematic, and no one in Central Europe, which is especially in Germany, cares. And so it's hard for politicians to make people care. Know your citizens and understand what components of propaganda appeal and why. So go back. Who are the scapegoats? What are the fears? Where are the divisions? Because those are our weaknesses and those are what are going to be exploited. There are concerns that are real, and you need to make sure that you don't ignore those. But there are also concerns that are secondary or tertiary, like our scapegoats. And then share your audience research with neighbors and allies. So much of this comes down to knowing your audience, and there are certain folks who know audiences around the world better than others. And we need to be better about sharing our knowledge of these audiences because those audiences are often being manipulated. Okay. I'm ready for your questions and to have an interesting conversation. I hope that this was at least somewhat informative and interesting, and I look forward to the chat.
Jed, thank you so much for that overview. It's really fascinating. And, as I was thinking during your talk, you could look at any nation around the world and find probably hundreds of examples of stories that are meant to undermine geopolitical unity and so on and so forth. I know you've done a lot of work in Eastern and Northern Europe, and maybe you can give us some examples of that. But particularly, I'm thinking a couple of years ago or several years ago when there was a massive refugee crisis out of Syria and related regions, and there was a huge backlash in many European nations against the refugees, using some of the same narrative language that you talked about a little bit earlier. And what I find really interesting about that is many of the populist leaders of these countries relied pretty heavily on what we'd call purity language of national integrity and purity and so on and so forth, when in fact, no modern nation state really has ever had that sort of purity. So maybe let's take, for example, Hungary and the regime there, which has been probably the most vociferously anti-refugee. Can you talk a little bit about how that played out and who is really driving those narratives?
That's a great question and a very unfortunate situation. There's a couple of different ways that you can answer this one. One is to look at the underlying problem, which is really one of nationalism. This notion of purity that you mentioned, that is invented, and it was invented in the 19th century by conservative, mostly autocratic rulers, especially in Central Europe. And this idea of the nation state and of problematic nationalism was really, it's a plague, but it's one that we created. We made it up, just like we invented this notion of race, which is so incredibly problematic. So if we understand the origins of these problems, we can better frame our responses. Now, if you want to look at the very specific situations of the refugee crisis in Europe, there were a number of people who were pushing this for their own advantages. And you had very different stories coming out of, say, Ankara, which said, actually, the refugees are coming here. They have to pass through here before they go there. You better give us what we want and let us do our own thing, or more than we're going to be heading your way. There were refugees being bused by Moscow to the border of Norway and then sent across in the freezing Arctic. So those are active measures. But if you look at what the populists like Orban were saying at the time, this idea of fear of pollution, fear of the other, that's a typical human response that existed before nationalism, but is being used by the nationalists and the populists.
Can I take you back? And by the way, before I ask this next question, I do want to remind you, you see across your screen a phone number. If you want to text a question into Jed, hopefully we'll have time to get to all of them, but please text your questions in and we'll give them to Jed as they come in. Let me do one follow-up here. I mentioned in my introduction the report that came out yesterday from the intelligence community looking at Russian disinformation campaigns in the U.S. And as you just mentioned, the Russians are pretty active in Norway and Finland and a number of Baltic countries. Why? What is in Russia's national interest to be so in everybody else's business? What does Russia gain from that?
Nothing. Russia gains nothing. They lose from it. The leadership in Moscow may have something that they feel they can gain, but no, it's a lose-lose for the Russian people. They're victim number one here. They just recalled their ambassador to the United States. So they're taking this stuff very seriously, and that recalling of the ambassador is a tell. It's a tell. Often when Moscow says you're doing something to us, it means they're doing it to someone else. And so when they overreact, they're basically giving away the game. There's a word, or there's a phrase, I think it was Russian originally, called reflexive control. Reflexive control is a goal of active measures. And it means your opponent is going to do what you want them to do, even if they're doing it in response to something that you did yourself, even if it theoretically makes you look bad. You want them. Reflexive control is when you were able to get a political response in a country, basically by making yourself look foolish or like taking the blame. And this, why did they do it? It would take a long time to describe, but if you could be you could be a geographic determinist and say that Russia has no natural boundaries, and that for all of its history, it has been a tiny island of Christianity surrounded by pagans who wanted to invade and kill them. To their south, to their east, to their west. The only safe direction was north, and that was the Arctic. And they expanded to fill out this continental empire, almost searching for natural boundaries, which just didn't really exist. It could be, and some people would say it is, that is deterministic of a certain cultural trait, which means that if you're interfering with something outside of your borders, it may not feel that way to you because you don't have borders, and because those people really are out to get you.
This might be an argument that Robert Kaplan makes, for example, in a recent book where he argues that the geography matters, right? But so if I'm understanding you right, Russia has little to gain from these tactics, but its neighbors and other nations have a lot to lose if Russia is successful. The report that was issued yesterday said it was not just to influence the outcome of the election, whatever you might think of that, but it was also designed to undermine faith in American democracy. Can you talk a little bit about that? How does that work? And I know you've worked extensively in Finland and other places. What's the end game for undermining faith in other national governments?
There's two major theories that I hear often. One has the charming title "Chaos Monster," that the Kremlin's being a chaos monster, that they want to sow doubt and division and dismay, so that everyone is so distracted with their own problems that they leave the folks in charge in Moscow alone. So it's the chaos monster theory is that they win simply by keeping others from acting. That's again goes back to the whole defensive thing. And the other is that it's the only game they've got, that they've got a weak hand, and they're playing their weak hand well. So if in the Black Sea region, some people would argue that they are keeping these frozen conflicts going in Transnistria, the Donbass, Abkhazia, to surround an area of great strategic importance to them with zones of criminality that they can then manipulate, or that will at least keep their opponents off of our toes or on our toes. And that, I think, is not a bad strategy. It's defensive, but it's certainly workable. And then you have to, and it's hard to undo. It's hard to undo. Why would they support corruption for its own sake? Well, corruption can become endemic. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I'm thinking of the issue, for example, the title of your talk, the emerging threat to global democracies. Yeah. Democracies, I think we would argue, we like to think that they're robust and hardy.
Yeah.
In some ways, they have some natural weaknesses, right? They've got some natural weaknesses that mean they can fail as they have in the past. We've seen democracies fail in the past, like Weimar Germany and so on and so forth. And authoritarian, we like to think in the U.S. that authoritarian governments are weak. Sometimes it seems like, well, actually, they've got kind of the stronger hand. And so by undermining faith in democracy, are you empowering authoritarianism? Or is it?
You could be. So some folks I talk to argue that, very smart people, they argue that Beijing is seeking to export their ideology to other countries, such as it is. Maybe not their ideology, but at least their way of governing, because they want to make sure that the world is safe for autocracies. And other people, whom I greatly respect, do not believe that at all. They don't think that Beijing cares less about what kind of governments other people have. They may want to export their facial recognition technology empowered by AI to empower autocrats, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're in games to overthrow democracies. And I don't know what that answer is. You're a better place to know, to have an opinion on that. But Moscow is not trying to, other than what I mentioned about corruption as being a way to keep others off balance. They're not trying to export their model. Why would they? And I don't think that many countries do that anymore. And I think that's a shame, because if you look at, for instance, the interwar period, you mentioned Weimar Germany. If you look at the interwar period, the fascists and the communists and the liberals all knew we were right. We all knew what the future looked like. And that we knew if we were communists that the future was communist. And we knew if we were fascists, the future was fascist. We knew we were going to win. And having that conflict, but really having that conversation, being aware that liberal democracy is not a natural outcome for humans, should make us more effective at communicating how important it is and how blessed we are to have it, so that we have the will to fight to defend that future that I mentioned earlier.
Terrific. I'm looking at some of the questions that have come in, and we've got a number of good questions, and I'm trying to sort of sort through and push them forward to you. One question has come in about journalistic protocols in social media and governance. Social media is largely lawless, as we know, and so the question is, would encouraging journalistic protocols in social media and governance be a step in the right direction for combating dis or misinformation? And would that be something that would be workable?
It's a conversation that a lot of very smart people are having in academic circles, in journalistic circles, and in legislative circles. I don't want the social media companies to be in the business of journalism. I don't know. It just doesn't strike me as necessarily the most benevolent combination. Journalistic protocols also have two other problems. One is that, and this is debated all the time, and I'm sure there's journalists listening now who could educate me on it. This notion of you really need to get both sides of the story can be very challenging when one of those sides is completely invented or manipulative. So one thing that RT, the Russian TV station, does very well is they say, well, we have these journalistic protocols in place, so we're going to make sure that we have all sides represented. And so what they'll do is they'll find a talking head from the West, an expert who's perhaps liberal. They'll find someone to give Moscow's point of view, and then they'll find a raving right-wing lunatic. And they'll position these three as, here's one side, here's the other, and look at the very calm, collected person in the middle. That must be the right way. So, and then there's one other problem with journalistic protocols, and that has to do with our ideas about journalism. And just very, very briefly, if you look at the period between the end of World War II and the rise of 24/7 cable news networks in the 80s, 90s, you will see a period where newsrooms looked alike, where they were full of people who looked like you and me, wearing matching ties, and they were producing. You could turn on your television and watch a handful of stations in any modern country and get roughly a good idea of the objective news. And sometimes I think when we talk about what we want out of journalism, we go back to that snippet of time, that generation or two, and we make that a model. But if you look at the way that information traveled before the end of World War II, and especially if you go back before the telegraph, so you go back to the way information traveled in, say, the revolutions of 1848, you will see a very, very familiar world. It will look a lot like social media. It will look a lot like your crazy aunt out in California as your only source. So I do worry that we can lean too much on journalism, or I'll stop there.
That's an excellent point. Maybe I overly romanticize the period of good journalism. So we've got a question that's come in about your graph, the graph you showed earlier. Where would you place a conspiracy theory on your graph? What role do those things? I mean, we've got lots of conspiracy theories. Yeah. Now. So how would you fit it in there as the fake news side or the?
It depends on your intent. So it could be misinformation. Some people believe in conspiracy theories because they're desperate. They have very real fears and they're looking for some kind of order. And so they latch onto conspiracy theories. And they may share those because they want to share their newfound knowledge with you. And that's not new. It goes back, well, all eternity, but it certainly goes back to the spread of different versions of Christianity in ancient Rome. That's for sure. With Gnosticism spread exactly like a conspiracy theory. So I wouldn't want to put it on that graph because it could be in a number of different places. Conspiracy theories can absolutely be used as weapons. Weaponized conspiracies are great. There was a guy, a good old Cold Warrior, and I was at a conference with him who had done a lot of counter Kremlin stuff back in the 1980s, and he was saying that you can have an argument with a member of the Soviet secret police. You can have an argument with them about their conspiracy theories, and you might even win the argument. And you might even convince them that they are wrong, that you might convince them. And it won't matter at all because their actual commitment is to a system and their behavior won't change. So there's no reason to have that conversation at all. So I don't feel comfortable putting conspiracy theories as a thing into that chart because the chart is about intent. And very few conspiracy theories are true. If they were, we wouldn't call them conspiracy theories. We'd come up with something else. But they appeal to different kinds of people. You remember Adam, our colleague, and we worked with in Helsinki, Adam Berensky? So Adam has this long-running survey where when he's doing all kinds of different projects, he'll ask people to go through a checklist of conspiracy theories, and he'll give them a list of 6 and say, how do you believe that this is true? And typically, not all the time, but typically, people will come back to him after looking at the survey and say, I'm not really sure what you're trying to do because 5 of these things are just nuts. But this last one, everyone knows is true. But it's not the same one. And so it's very rare that people believe in multiple conspiracy theories, which to me would indicate they're using them to solve a problem. That was a long answer to a short question. Sorry.
No, that's interesting. Okay, so another question has come in about, we are very concerned, of course, about Russian engagement, active measures, as you've termed them. How common do you think this is in developing countries? So particularly, think of Uganda or Montenegro and places that are emerging. How common is this kind of practice?
Far more common and far more dangerous. What we are experiencing here in a country like the United States is nothing compared to the danger of conspiracy theories and hateful interpretations of events spreading like wildfire through mobile technology. The way that political manipulators have manufactured these giant farms of disinformation in the Philippines would turn your stomach. It is far, far worse in these countries. And that is a very, very big problem for democracy worldwide.
Man, you're scaring me.
Sorry.
Are Russia and China playing a long game together? In other words, sort of a good cop, bad cop kind of thing. Do you think there's an attempt to displace the U.S. through a disinformation collaboration?
No. I mean, there may be, every now and then you'll see them do things that are cooperative in all kinds of spaces, not just information, economics, military. But no, they have very different goals. The long-term goals of Beijing and Moscow are not the same at all.
So sorry. No, go ahead. Finish off.
If just imagine this: if you're sitting in Moscow and you're thinking, what happens if I can no longer sell oil and gas? What happens to my country? And we're going to have some serious problems. And who's going to take advantage of that? Who's got 1 billion people on the border of the part of our country that has all the resources and no people? So in the long run, I don't see that one happening.
I think I share your opinion on that. I don't see I see sort of a mutual mistrust between Russia and China. I'd like to, this will be the final question, but we've talked a lot about the U.S. and so on, but we've got a lot of allies that we rely on for stability.
Yeah.
Germany, France, the UK, Japan, Korea. I'd like to frame it as a little bit of a multi-phase question, as it were. Number one, how are they dealing with this? Are they facing the same challenges we are? Are they dealing with it effectively? And to what extent does that undermine our ability to maintain these alliances?
So the second part of that question about maintaining the alliances, that working together is what maintains the alliances. That's interoperability with your hardware, your software, and your disinformation, your counter disinformation campaigns. Interoperability is key to maintaining alliances. So the more we work together, the more we're going to maintain that interoperability and have the alliances be strong. How are they doing? Some are doing better than others. It really depends on how engaged they are with the problem. France, the French government says they've had some real victories countering manipulation of their elections, but of course they had a very, very bad problem a few years ago. And I've also heard people who doubt the reality of their effectiveness. The British were widely known as being leaders in this space. They had some inherited tools of public diplomacy that go all the way back to the empire. So they had a jump on everyone in terms of being able to use effective public diplomacy. They just had the institutions in place, like the BBC, the British Council, et cetera. The Canadians have really emerged in a leadership role, especially integrating the various intelligence communities to work on this kind of problem. And then some other countries, they have some problems. If you're in Germany and some of your political leadership has literally been bought, and these are people that some voters still look up to and trust, that's problematic. Mm-hmm. And then Australia has had some challenges of allowing this idea of reflexive control. I've seen they've been reflexively controlled by certain other actors on occasion. Mm-hmm. But I would definitely say that the British have a great advantage, and that the Canadians have really emerged into a leadership position.
Jed, we've had a number of other questions come in, and unfortunately we've run out of time, and I don't feel like it'd be fair to keep you here till 10 p.m., which is how long it would take. But again, as I stated at the beginning, I think there are very few challenges as far-reaching as this one in terms of disinformation and the impact that can have on global stability, on the rise of global democracy. And there's no better person to help us understand that. So thank you very much for your time this evening, to taking time out to address these issues. I've learned a lot about this through the years from engagement with you, and we're so grateful for the work you're doing. So thank you for joining us tonight, and we look forward to welcoming you to the beautiful campus of Oklahoma State University sometime in the future.
Well, thank you very much. It was a real pleasure. I deeply regret not being able to meet your students, because that would be the best part. So hopefully in the near future, we'll be able to right that wrong.
Thanks so much. And thanks to our audience for joining us tonight. This is our last global briefing of this academic year, and we're grateful for your participation. If you've got feedback or would like to hear about more events at the School of Global Studies and Partnerships, please write to us at sgsp@okstate.edu, and we'll make sure you're on our email list. This broadcast will be available on OState TV in